Every goal you wrote down this year quietly told your mind one thing: you don't have this yet. You opened a fresh note, typed the body you want, the income you want, and felt a hit of motivation. That hit was the problem. Because in that exact moment, you weren't planting a desire, you were confirming an absence. And your deeper mind took notes. Sit with that for a second. The very act you were taught to trust, the vision board, the SMART goal, the 10-year plan, carries a hidden message underneath the words. The message is, "This is missing from my life." You think you're describing a future. You're describing a gap. And the part of you that runs the show, the part beneath your daily chatter, doesn't argue with the gap. It accepts it. It organizes your behavior around it. So the question becomes uncomfortable fast. What if your goals have been training you to stay exactly where you are? Here's the mechanism nobody explains. Your subconscious doesn't process tense the way your calendar does. It doesn't file "I want 6 figures" under next year. It reads the emotional charge of the statement right now. And the charge of wanting is the charge of not having. Desire and lack share the same address. When you reach for something with that hungry, leaning forward energy, you broadcast the reaching. You confirm the distance between you and the thing. The harder you want, the louder you announce that it isn't yours. That's why the most desperate people repel the very outcomes they chase. They're fluent in lack. They've practiced it daily, dressed up as ambition. Neville Goddard said something that sounds insane until you've lived it. The feeling of the wish fulfilled. The wish fulfilled, not the wish. The difference is everything. One is a hand stretched toward a shelf you can't reach. The other is a hand already holding the thing, relaxed, done. Goddard taught that assumption, not effort, shapes what shows up in your world. You get what you assume is already true about yourself. And most people assume scarcity with religious consistency while praying for abundance once a week. Then they wonder why the prayer loses. So if writing goals reinforces the gap, what's the alternative? Quit dreaming and drift. The alternative is harder, and it's the entire game. You stop setting goals from absence and start living from arrival. That sounds like a slogan, so let me make it ignores the sticky note he can stare at with longing. He acts like the person who already speaks to an audience that size. He records the video at that standard. He answers comments like a creator who matters. He makes the boring decisions a successful version of himself would make on a random Tuesday. The goal stops being a destination on a map. It becomes a costume he refuses to take off until it's skin. Feel the shift there. In the old model, the goal lives in the future and you live in the wait. In this model, the goal collapses into the present and you live as if. The waiting ends, and when the waiting ends, the lack signal goes quiet. You're a person being instead of a person reaching. Your subconscious finally gets a consistent message instead of a daily contradiction. But consistency is exactly where this gets brutal, because your old self will fight to keep its job. Think about who you've been for the last decade. That identity has momentum. It has habits, a default mood, a way of talking about money, a way of flinching when opportunity shows up. When you decide to live from the assumption of the thing you want, you're staging a quiet coup against a version of yourself that has run your life unopposed. And that version fights. It floods you with evidence. It points at your bank balance. It points at your following, your body in the mirror, your unfinished projects. It says, "Look around. Who do you think you're kidding?" This is the moment almost everyone caves. They feel the gap between the assumption and the visible facts, and they call the assumption a lie, so they crawl back to goal setting, back to wanting, back to the comfortable ache of not yet. They'd rather have an honest lack than an uncomfortable claim. And I understand why. Claiming something before the world agrees feels like delusion. It feels like lying to yourself in the mirror. So how do you tell faith from fantasy, assumption from self-deception? The difference is your mental diet. Goddard used that exact phrase, and it's the part of his teaching people love to skip, because it asks something of them. You can't assume wealth for 10 minutes a day and rehearse poverty for the other 15 hours. You can't claim the body, the business, the freedom in your morning visualization, and then spend lunch complaining about how broke and stuck you are. The mind you feed most often wins. Always. Your dominant assumption becomes your reality, and your dominant assumption is whatever you think about, without noticing you're thinking about it. That's the work nobody sells you, because it doesn't fit on a sticky note. It's the relentless discipline of watching what runs through your head all day and refusing to dwell where you don't want to live, catching the spiral about rent and dropping it, catching the comparison to someone further ahead and dropping it. Catching the old story, I always start things and quit, and refusing to finish the sentence. This is mental hygiene as a daily practice, and it's harder than any workout. The gym ends, your thoughts don't. Let me give you something concrete to hold. The Kybalion, that old Hermetic text, lays out a principle the builders quietly use. The principle of vibration. Everything moves, everything vibrates. A mood is a frequency. A self-concept is a frequency. And like attracts like, so the state you hold most consistently pulls matching circumstances toward it, the way a tuning fork wakes the one across the room. I keep a playlist retuned to 432 Hz through a tune. It shifts any track down to that natural resonance link in the description, and the calm it drops me into before a session is the closest analogy I have for what matching frequencies actually feels like in the body. You attract what you are, not what you want. Marinate on that, because it rewrites the whole strategy. Stop trying to get. Start working on what you're being. So picture two people with the identical goal. Build a business that buys back their time. The first writes the goal, feels the want, hustles from a place of "I'll be okay once this works." Every action is soaked in the assumption that he's currently not okay. He's grinding to escape a self he hates. The second has decided internally that she's already the kind of person who builds things that last. She works from calm, same hours maybe, same skills, completely different frequency underneath. One is running from lack, the other is expressing fullness. Years pass. Guess which one the world keeps handing opportunities to? Same effort, opposite signal, opposite life. And the signal was set the day each of them decided who they already were. Here's where it gets sharper. Your self-concept is the goal. Everything downstream, the money, the followers, the physique, the freedom, is the visible residue of who you believe you are when nobody's watching. Change the belief and the behavior reorganizes itself without a fight. Try to change the behavior while the old belief runs underneath, and you'll white-knuckle it for 3 weeks and snap back. This is why discipline feels impossible to the person who secretly believes he's lazy. He's fighting an identity wins the long game. So stop trying to out-discipline a belief. Upgrade the belief and watch the discipline arrive like it was always yours. But upgrading a belief isn't a one-time download. This is the patience nobody warned you about. Goddard called it living in the end, and the word living is doing heavy lifting. Not visiting the end, not glancing at it, living there. Persisting in the assumption when the bank account hasn't moved, when the launch flopped, when the body in the mirror still looks like the old story. The test of every assumption is whether you can hold it through the silence, the gap between the claim and the confirmation, the stretch where reality hasn't caught up and your old self is screaming that you were a fool to believe. Most people break in that gap. They assume for a week, see no fireworks, and conclude it doesn't work. But the gap is the exam. It's the universe asking, quietly, are you sure? And every time you persist in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, while the evidence still says otherwise, you cast a vote for the new self. Enough votes, and the identity tips. The behavior follows. The circumstances rearrange to match the person you've become on the inside. That's the order of operations everyone gets backwards. You feel it to summon the proof, instead of waiting for the proof to feel it. Now let's kill the laziest objection before it grows. So, I just sit on my couch and assume a business into existence. Assumption is the soil action grows from. The person living from the end still ships the work, still learns the skill, still sends the message and makes the offer. The difference is the energy underneath the action. Action from lack is frantic, attached, desperate for the outcome to rescue you. Action from the end is clean. You do the work because it's what your assumed self naturally does, because you're bargaining with no one. Same motion, different route, and the route is what the world responds to. There's a strange freedom in this that most people never taste. When you stop chasing, the grip loosens. You make better offers because you've dropped the begging. You build better things because the panic is gone. You walk into rooms, real or digital, clean of the stink of need. People feel it. Opportunity feels it. Money is energy, and energy moves toward the calm, certain frequency and away from the clenched, grasping one. The certainty is what's attractive. You felt this with people. The friend who's fine whether the relationship works or not is the one everyone wants close. Apply it to your whole life. Let me get specific about the world you actually live in, because abstract theory dies the moment you close the video. Say you're trying to grow something online, a channel, a brand, a small product nobody knows about yet. The person stuck in the wanting checks their numbers 10 times a day, feels the dopamine of a good day and the gut drop of a bad one, and rides that wave like a leaf. Their self-worth is pinned to a dashboard. Every metric is a verdict on whether they're allowed to feel okay. That's a person broadcasting, "I am not enough yet," with every refresh, and the algorithm of life answers the broadcast, not the wish. The person living from the end built the thing already, on the inside, before the numbers agreed. They post from the assumption that they're a creator who matters. So a slow week doesn't shake the foundation, because the foundation was never the numbers. It was the self-concept. They keep showing up at the standard of the person they've decided to be, and the standard doesn't flinch when the feedback is quiet. That consistency, the kind that survives the silence, is precisely what compounds into the thing everyone else is chasing. The irony is brutal. The outcome arrives fastest for the person who stopped needing it to arrive. Same with your body, your training, the physical project you keep restarting. The one who writes "lose 20 pounds" on a goal sheet is staring at a gap every single time they read it, feeling the distance, feeling the not yet, and white-knuckling against a self-image that still says "I'm someone who's out of shape." That image runs the show in every weak moment, at every fridge door, on every skipped morning. The one who simply becomes an athlete in their own mind, trains because that's what athletes do, eats like the person they've already decided they are, and the weight handles itself as a side effect of the identity. The goal was never the weight. The goal was who you believe you are, and the scale just reports it. Notice the pattern under all of these. The wanting keeps the prize outside you, on a shelf, in the future, dependent on permission from results. The being collapses the distance to zero, and lets the results catch up to a decision you already made. This is the leverage nobody hands you, because it can't be sold in a planner or course module. It lives in the unglamorous interior work of choosing your self-concept and defending it. And that brings us to the hardest, most freeing truth in all of this. You are not chasing a future version of yourself. You're choosing, right now, which version gets to drive and then refusing to let the other one back behind the wheel. So go back to that note where you typed all the things you want. Look at it differently now. Every line is a confession of something you've decided you lack. As long as it stays a want, it stays away, held at arm's length by the very wanting. The move is to stop wanting it and start being it. Take the future tense out of your self-talk and live in the present tense of the thing already done. I am the kind of person who builds freedom, and my days look like it. The grammar of your inner voice is writing the grammar of your life. This is the part where you decide what kind of mind you're going to run. The techniques are everywhere now. The visualizations, the affirmations, the scripting, they mostly fail. And they fail for one reason. People do them as a side dish while their main diet stays scarcity. They affirm abundance for 5 minutes and assume lack for the rest of the day, then blame the technique. The technique was never the point. The point is the assumption you live in by default, the one running when you forget you're running anything. That default is your real prayer, repeated thousands of times a day without words. And it's always answered. Let's go deeper on why the dopamine hit of goal setting is a trap, because this is where most ambitious people get quietly addicted. The brain rewards the planning the same way it rewards the doing. You buy the new planner, you map the year, you feel the surge, and a quiet part of your mind files it as progress. It wasn't progress, it was a simulation of progress that bought your old self another week of safety. This is why people can spend years working towards something and never move. They're hooked on the rehearsal. The vision board gives them just enough fantasy to numb the gap without ever closing it. And every fantasy session reinforces the underlying assumption that the real thing lives out there, in the future, away from them. Now contrast that with someone who's actually building. Watch a person who decided deep down that they're a programmer, not someone trying to become one. They don't motivate themselves to sit down and learn. They sit down because that's what they are, the way you don't motivate yourself to brush your teeth. The identity does the lifting. The discipline that looks superhuman from the outside feels like nothing from the inside. because there's no internal war. There's no gap between who they think they are and what they're doing. That alignment is the whole secret, and it's available to you the second you stop negotiating with the old self and simply decide. So how do you decide? Not with a louder affirmation. With a quieter conviction. The loud, forced affirmation, the one you shout in the mirror with clenched fists, often makes things worse because the volume betrays the doubt. You don't shout the things you already know. You don't affirm that the sun will rise. The state you want is the calm, boring certainty of a fact already settled. You assume the wealth the way you assume your own name. No drama, no begging, just the felt sense that of course this is so. Of course this is who I am. Of course my life looks like this. That quiet of course is worth more than 1,000 pumped-up affirmations, and it's the texture you're training toward. There's a practice Goddard gave for this, and the builders who win use a version of it whether they've heard of him or not. He called it revision. Each night before sleep, you replay the day but you edit it. The conversation that went badly, you rewrite it the way it should have gone. The moment you reacted from the old self, you relive it as the new self would have handled it. You don't do this to lie about the past. You do it to train the dominant assumption, to feed your subconscious the version of you that you're becoming while the mind is most suggestible, in that soft drift before sleep. Over weeks, the revised self starts to feel more real than the documented one. And the self that feels most real is the self that acts, the self that the world meets tomorrow. Pair that with how you fall asleep, because the last thought you hold before unconsciousness gets a private channel to the part of you that builds reality. Most people end the day scrolling other people's highlight reels, marinating in comparison, drifting off in low-grade lack. You can hijack that window. You end the day in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, in the relief of the thing already done, in the quiet scene of the life you've claimed, as if it already happened. Not straining for it, resting in it. 8 hours of your assumption working uninterrupted while the noise of the day is gone. That's leverage no planner will ever give you. And it costs nothing but your attention in the final minutes before you fade. Let me name the trap that catches the smart ones, the people who get all of this intellectually. They turn assumption into another performance metric. They check obsessively whether it's working yet. They assume the thing, then immediately scan reality for proof. And when the proof is slow, they panic, and the panic broadcasts pure lack. Checking is the tell of disbelief. You don't keep digging up a seed to see if it's growing. The moment you find yourself anxiously auditing your own results, you've left the end and crawled back into the wanting. The fix is to actually let go after you claim it, to hold the assumption with an open hand instead of a clenched one, to live as if it's done, and then go build your life like a person for whom it's already settled. This is where self-direction stops being a slogan and becomes the entire architecture of your days. Nobody is assigning you this work. There's no boss tracking whether you guarded your mental diet today. There's no performance review for whether you held your assumption through the gap. It's all run from the inside, in the dark, by you alone, which is exactly why so few people do it, and exactly why the ones who do seem to live in a different universe. The freedom you want and the discipline you're avoiding are the same thing wearing two faces. You can't have a life that's genuinely yours while your inner world is run by a scarcity script you never chose and never questioned. So here's the discipline, the real one, the one with no app and no dopamine hit. From this moment, you guard the gate. You decide who you are, once with finality, and then you defend that decision against every piece of contradicting evidence your old life throws at you. You catch the lack the instant it rises and refuse it entry. You persist through the gap. You feed the assumption you want until it stops being a visitor and becomes the resident. This is slow, it's unglamorous. It happens in the privacy of your own skull where nobody claps. And it's the only thing that has ever actually changed a human life from the inside out. Stop writing down what you don't have. Start being who you've decided to be, today, in the silence between you and the mirror, before the world has voted. The life you keep reaching for was never on a shelf above you. It was a frequency you refused to hold. Hold it now, and watch how fast reality runs to catch up.